I think we're ready. Are we ready? I don't know, it doesn't sound like we're ready. Are we ready? It's more like it. That's what I like to hear. Like people are ready. I like the people are not shy. I like the people have a feeling in their heart and it comes out through their voice. That's what I love. So let me get comfortable here for a second. So today is a very special day because it's today. And it's the only day there ever is. Yesterday and tomorrow are just in your mind. Everything is political because everything is mediated through systems of power and control. We know this. We all know this. And we spend a lot of our time, we who seek liberation from these systems of control, we spend a lot of our time thinking about and analyzing and talking about and sharing about what's going on with these systems of control, power and oppression, obviously, because we're resisting it. And I think it's also very useful to continue to think about what is the destination, what is the liberation, and as maybe posited as a theme for the evening, what does that freedom feel like? You know, everyone from Instagram psychics to quantum physicists agree that having a feeling in your body and in your spirit of where you want to be literally creates something, and it allows us to pass through kind of quantum dimensions, and it gets really crazy if you get into the physics of it. And so it's important to keep thinking about and keep feeling, what does freedom feel like? And so this is the starting point. Nina Simone famously, I don't know how famous this interview is, but there's an interview and they're saying, what is freedom? And she says, freedom is no fear. She says it kind of like that. It's a great moment. She's like, no fear. To go through, to say what you want to say, to be who you are and who you feel, you know? That's freedom. That's freedom. No fear. To act from joy and love and passion, not act from fear. And she says, and as I have often sung with the person who bears the torch of the Nina Simone legacy, her brother and longtime collaborator, Dr. Sam Wayman. And as we sing this song, how we can be transported into that feeling, right? I wish that I knew what it felt like to be free. I wish I could break all the chains holding me. Oh, I wish I could say all the things that I should say. Say it loud, say it clear, for the whole world to hear. Say it loud, say it clear, for the whole wide world to hear. And that's the energy. Say it loud, say it clear, for the whole world to hear. And this, described as freedom of speech, is the fundamental, one of the fundamental building blocks of a free society, right? And it's key. And it's key that we be able to express that. And each and every single one of us, each day, once or many times, has a moment, and there's a thing that only we can say. And we must say that. We should say that. And that's a fundamental challenge and work and freedom is exercise. And it's really, really key. Right? So won't you sing with me these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever had these songs of freedom, redemption songs. We've been singing about freedom forever. We hearken back to the 60s. It's this golden era that's been mythologized. There's, protests, and so much music was created and so much movement in society. We have a very similar moment now. People being kidnapped off the street. In the 60s, it was to put a machine gun in their hand and send them to die for a war that is just about dropping bombs so they can steal tax money to buy new bombs. Today, people be kidnapped off the street to take into a prison labor camp called the ICE Detention Center, And these songs through the ages keep us going, keep us remembering that it's a practice, right? I got a hammer and I got a bell. I got a song to sing all over this land. It's the hammer of justice. It's the bell of freedom. It's a song about my brothers and sisters living together all over this land. That song's written in the 40s and still resonates and still keeps us through these movements and keep us through. This was, it was written by Pete Seeger in the 40s, but it was so, this movement and this type of thought and this thinking and bringing people together, that was here in New York, this Pete Seeger. And the civil rights movement, that they're trying to undo the basic fundamental win of it now. We got to keep imagining what freedom feels like. We got to keep going and getting there. In the 60s also, we have a lot of other things. You have the Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and all the protest music that came out and everything. And then there's other things that now we see. How could that have happened in the 60s? We didn't even know. In 67, the apartheid state of Israel invaded Palestine, Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan. And after that, there's a 16-year-old Palestinian American named Zainab Shahat who tried to kind of go along with it. Oh, people care about stuff, let's stop. Have you heard the urgent call of Palestine? Have you heard the urgent call of Palestine? Palestine, Palestine. That one didn't make it to the playlist of hits of the 60s. But how apt it is. And she's looking for that feeling of freedom and the feeling of liberation. The other thing that we need to keep thinking about, if individually our right to speak freely, our right to protest and all of these, communally, the right to free press and to be able to broadcast and to be able to have shared understanding of truth. That's one of the other fundamental building blocks of a free society, that we can be free to individually express who we are and what we want to say, that together as a movement or as communities we can broadcast and we can create and have a shared understanding of truth, right? It's very important. And as these songs go through the years, they sometimes get taken up. I'm going to play a snippet from one of my favorite queer UK rockers, who this song is about his experience not feeling free, or definitely feeling a lot of fear around being a massive rock star and not coming to terms of what it is to be queer in the 70s and 80s and everything. But then this song was taken apparently by people in South Africa fighting against the apartheid government there. I want to break free. I want to break free. I want to break free from it all. You're so self-satisfied, I don't need you. I want to break free. God knows I want to break free. We feel that all the time. And I want to inject that feeling of yearning for freedom, and that the desire for freedom is stronger than the fear. We've got to nurture that in each other, you know? And when things go out, and really such a struggle right now at an institutional, at an infrastructure level, all the media is being conglomerated and controlled by a very, very small group of psychopaths. And so we got to be out here building an alternative. We got to build our own cultural infrastructure. And the press is part of that. Movements are part of that. Coordination and all kind of other ways. Because there's nonstop lies going on out there. And I'm going to leave you with a final kind of thought. So I'm going to hum. 'Cause all we have to do is take these lies and make them true. All we have to see is that I don't belong to you and you don't belong to me. Freedom, freedom, freedom. You got to give what you take. Freedom, 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 freedom. You got to give what you take. I hope some of these reminders, little songs kind of go around in your head, keep you going. And I hope we all keep thinking about those things. Free to be stronger than the fear to express and say what we have to say when we have to say it, and that changes the room that you're in. You change the room you're in, and you matter, and you're important, and you saying what is true that only you can say is key. It's key to our society. And then the other part that we're doing is this: make our own press, freedom of the press, and build it in a way that actually reflects truth, actually reflects diversity of communities and societies that build this world. And so for some of the next little period of time, we're going to hear from a lot of incredible people, their take on this and so many other important, the key that work that we got to be doing today as people to keep building towards a free society, and to introduce those people, speak with them, and guide you through this beautiful evening. We have my partner, co-founder, and well, I'll leave it there, etc. Incredible human, Céline Seman.
Thank you so much. Oops, is this on? Thank you so much. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Collis Brown. Collis Brown, everyone. Thank you all for being here. This is a very special TV show that is broadcasted on Everything is Political, our independent platform. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Céline Seman. I'm Lebanese. I came to North America as a refugee when I was a child during the war on Lebanon, the invasion of Israel in Lebanon. I'm 43 years old, so my entire life has been in this reality. And coming here, my family named me Céline because they knew I was going to travel, and they knew that we were not going to be staying in Lebanon. I was born in 1982 when Israel had sieged Beirut, and 200,000 people died in that siege. That's a huge number that's being disputed. In the records, they are agreeing at 30,000, but you understand that these numbers are way more than 30,000 because we are witnessing what they are doing in Gaza and the numbers that are being disputed coming out of Gaza. And so the same was happening in Beirut when I was born. So when we traveled to come here, we all had foreign names, sort of like a passport. For us to be able to assimilate, blend in, just have a normal life, be able to study without being ostracized. But even if my name was French, and I speak French. This is my first language is Arabic, but French was my second language. And we emigrated to Canada, Montreal. Even with that name, I still couldn't fit in. And ultimately, throughout my life, I was always this outsider. And so I created the Slow Factory sort of as a world for the outsiders, for the misfits, for the people that don't belong in specific institutions or specific media places or specific corporations. And Slow Factory grew from 2012 to today and has given birth to yet another project, which is called Everything is Political. And Everything is Political is a media platform. I fought so hard not to be a media platform. I really thought media is so easy. Everything is media. You have social media. We need to focus on systems. We need to build infrastructure. And that was what the work of Slow Factory was doing, you know, providing necessary things for places like in Lebanon, Palestine, and Syria, but also all over the global south. But being vocal about politics, even if they aren't political, let's say, like human rights. Everything is political at the end of the day because we got targeted so severely that the funding dwelled down and we became sort of on a hit list, especially after 2023. This forced me to recognize that one, everything is political. I cannot go around that. And two, we are a media platform, whether I like it or not. So let's be serious about it. Let's build something that is providing an infrastructure for all the people that we are serving within Slow Factory, but giving them a space to write, to engage, to share their ideas, to protect journalism around the world by working with independent journalists all over the world. Because guess what? Since we started Everything is Political, thousands and thousands of journalists lost their jobs, and we're going to be talking about that tonight. And what happens when our media, the public media, is owned by billionaires? Most of our public media is currently owned by billionaires. We're also going to talk about that tonight. And when we're saying everything is political, this is a sentence that I hear on the left and on the right and in the center, and all of these are, divisions that make us feel like we're voting for a team. We want team blue or team red, but all of these divisions are becoming more and more blurred with one another because the loyalty of the public is no longer on these figures that are extremely deceptive. The loyalty of the public is towards the public, is towards their communities. So what happens? What kind of structures could we create? And we're also going to talk about that. So without further ado, allow me to welcome John Gray. We're going to start with Food is Political. John Gray is please, John, come to my beautiful couch. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to read a short intro. Also, we did not want to buy anything from Amazon, so I don't have an applause machine. And I hope you will applaud generously. John Gray is the co-founder of the culinary collective Ghetto Gastro. Since 2012, Ghetto Gastro has been committed to feeding inspiring and growing young entrepreneurs in the Bronx, while also establishing the Bronx as a global culinary destination. Now with his new restaurant, Gourmega, am I saying it correctly?
Perfectly.
Which opened already, but tonight you're going to be going there. John Gray uses food as a form of communal exchange and a celebration to the city's many diasporic communities. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for clapping, everyone. Congratulations on your flagship restaurant that you have to run to later tonight. I know your work has been deeply involved in food justice and culinary art together. Tell me in your words how food is political, especially here in America, in the United States.
Well, I think, food has often been politicized and used as a tool of oppression. We tend to think about using food as a form of class destruction, not mass destruction. So how do we kind of celebrate like the source of so many of the things we love, the creators of it that often don't get credit? When you're thinking about American cuisine, the roots are definitely indigenous, but then also African and black women were the people in the kitchens that created like American food, and they don't really get their just due or their honor. So for us, it's really about just celebrating the legacy of the shoulders we stand on, and also understanding that because we have the great privilege to frolic in the luxurious spaces, is like, how do we bring stories from the Bronx, which is very food insecure. It's what you would call a food desert, right? But I tend to say more of like it's not a natural occurrence, so it's more man-made, you know. So it's like we say food apartheid, you know. It's not a accident that the Bronx has the largest food distribution center of its kind in the world, like the second largest fish market, Tuskegee in Tokyo. Then we have like a lot of produce and vegetables, and then these neighborhoods where these distribution centers, they deal with the asthma from the truck traffic when these trucks are going to your favorite Michelin star restaurant in New York City or in the Northeast, but then we don't have any of that food to eat. So for me, it was very near and dear to my heart because I still live in the Bronx, I grew up in the Bronx, to talk about these things with the platform that we have.
Absolutely. I went to one of your gatherings a long time ago, and it was just so beautiful to see that you bring in also culinary art, you know, because this could have been a nonprofit. You could have been like, no, I'm just going to do this, but you're also bringing the arts of making food, and which is translating also in the restaurant that you created, the design of it. Tell us a little bit about the very design of the tables, the way that there is this community is at the heart of the design of it for it to be communal.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about Gourmet and how we wanted to be super intentional with the space. And we work with a brilliant architect, Miriam Moussoufou from Niger. And when she was doing it, because I'm from the Bronx, but our restaurant is on Houston Street, the Greenwich Village kind of Soho border. And when she was doing the research of the site, she was like, this site used to be owned by formerly enslaved black people. It was called the Land of the Blacks, where it was like 307 acres of farmland between Soho, like the Soho, the Greenwich Village, the West Village, that belonged to black people. So we were like, all right, let's kind of think about the Land of the Blacks. And because, you know, you have King Street down the block, we kind of wanted to make the space like a homage to black queens. So thinking about, all right, what would be a space that's super comfortable for black queens? Because when I think about nourishment, which is always at the top of what we're concerned about, the first person to nourish any human was a woman in Africa, right? So we wanted to honor that. So yeah, that's kind of oh yeah, and the table.
Yes.
Part of my
And the
ADHD.
communal, how she designed it also.
Yeah, so the table is a series of circles. You know, we wanted to kind of reject that hegemonic and the patriarchy of the idea of the head of the table, and it's like your proximity to power is based on where you're sitting at a table and how close you are to the head. So there is no head. We did circles to kind of celebrate the ancestral tradition of gathering around a fire and looking at, like, we call ourselves the mouth of the global south. When we look at other cultures, like in the continents, Asia, around the world, you know, not from a Eurocentric view, it's often in a circle, and it's communal, it's family style. It's not like just a single plate in front of you. So we wanted to kind of bring that into a different vibe. So we're doing what we call Afro-Asiatic Americana, AAA.
I can't wait to try. That sounds so good. On social media, on Truth social media, Trump said that he's making food more affordable, yet the prices of groceries are increasingly going up. What's your take on that and some of the solutions? So this is the Truth social media with Trump saying he's making food more affordable. And I could show you a little bit. This is literally the tweet. I mean, the Truth tweet.
I think we all know Trump is full of shit. And he made the Knicks lose with that bad energy when he went to the Garden. Yeah, that's the crock of shit. Cause I think he like ran off of like this whole idea about the price of eggs, right? And then if you look at the data, food costs have only increased when fuel increases, food is always going to increase, right? And then when you're thinking about, you know, trying to do this mass deportation of the people that actually make sure we have food on the plate, you know, so it's just hustling backwards, but it's all kind of a trick to just everybody just trying to stuff their own pockets and take care of themselves. So I think misinformation and with a little bit of charisma and a couple of punchlines has definitely been able to kind of pull the wool over a lot of people's eyes. But food costs are up and SNAP benefits are down. Like, so when you think about food insecurity and the hunger crisis, there's 41 million people in America that go to bed hungry each night. Like, that's a crazy amount when you think about all of the resources
In the richest country in the world,
in this country. Yeah, it's really embarrassing, you know, and it's like totally unnecessary. And even the way we treat our soil, like from not having enough nitrogen and not using regenerative farming techniques and monoculture in the agricultural sense, it's just we don't have a lot of respect for the planet, and you know what we're dealing with the repercussions of that.
And you've always been very deeply involved in this type of food security projects, and you know, are you involved in any urban farming, or are you interested in something like that? Do you think that's something that could work?
It's funny. I think because my pops was like worked with his hands and I didn't grow up with him, I think I always resented doing that type of work. So I knew I just had to get some money so I could not have to do it. But my mother has a garden. For one of her birthday gifts, I got her signed up with the Stone Barns like gardening program, and she took that. She's in Savannah now, growing things. So I support a lot of urban farms, and with the work we're doing at Gourmega, we do 3,000 meals a week, so probably about 150,000 meals a year to neighbors in need that we distribute to like the Bowery Mission, Queensbridge houses, and we want to make nutritious, delicious meals that people can enjoy and eat with dignity, you know.
Wow, I did not know that. Thank you. That's awesome. I remember when we first met, we shared a few words, but you told me vanilla is black, and I couldn't forget that sentence, and I want to talk to you about that. Tell me a little bit about this.
Yeah, you know, it's just a lot of misinformation. Like this idea, like that vanilla is supposed to be all American, white, plain. It's really not. It's like it comes from the Veracruz region in the Teutonic area in Mexico. It's indigenous. The first person to pollinate a vanilla flower was a young enslaved boy named Edmund. So yeah, vanilla is black and brown. It's VIB. It's black and brown. You know. I always look at like vanilla, chocolate, all of these cash crops where the people that like nurture and cultivate the land and cultivate these crops don't usually capture the value or the upside in a commercial way, right? It's often like you think of espresso, you think of Italy, you don't think of Eritrea or Ethiopia, right? So I wanted to kind of just put a counter narrative about like the true origin of so many things we love. People think horchata might be Spanish or Mexican, but the first version was North African, right? And then with the Moors going to Spain, you know, they traded in the tiger nuts for rice when they got to the Americas, right? So it's like thinking about where people travel, food travels, and how it just shifts culture. You know, culture actually, there's no culture without agriculture, you know? So food is at the inception of the cultural fabric.
And with the import and export and the price of oil going up, as you said, it's all tied to actually what's happening in Iran, what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, the sort of war that the United States has entered with Iran has put this food insecurity on the as the reality for most Americans, because most of the things are imported. In fact, we are relying on such a big import-export, even here in the United States when we have land. And as you said, you touched on a little bit the soil not being able to be treated properly because of the chemicals and the pesticides that are being put there. How do you see this play out for you with the restaurant, for example, having to, we don't know if there's going to be a COVID situation where they stop importing, but this type of import-export is getting delayed. It's getting really, really expensive. How is this affecting businesses here?
Well, for us, because our everything we do is really expensive, like we could kind of absorb some of that cost, but it's just tough. Like we try to make sure we're doing a lot of ferments, and like we're doing a nose to tail with every ingredient. Like nothing is going to waste. If there's something left over, let's make a vinegar. Let's ferment. Like honestly, and these things aren't new, right? These things are ancestral. So it's like, how do we just make sure we're not wasting? We're stretching the work. We're working with local farmers, and also understanding. I think people need to understand the true cost of food, because the cost of convenience has just really masked how much things cost, right? And it doesn't have an equitable supply chain where it's like everybody is able to live off of their labor. So I think sometimes things might have to be expensive, but we just have to try to create equilibrium across the board of affordability and like how people get paid and what they can afford and this and that. You know.
What was the first recipe you did on your own? Like, how did you get into this?
You know, it's funny. I'm always like, people have me messed up because I'm not a cook. Like I cook the books, but I'm a food lover. But it's funny because I just did a video of I had a book published. My first cookbook wasn't Black Power Kitchen. It was actually a cookbook I did at the 92nd Street Y when I went to after school there while I was living in the projects in Spanish Harlem. And it was ants on a log. So that was celery, peanut butter with raisins. But I did like a new version for this new video to combat summer hunger, like, because, you know, a lot of kids aren't in school and kids sometimes depend on that free lunch to have a meal during the summer. So we're working with like City Harvest and doing some stuff. So I did a recipe video, and my video was celery, you know what I'm saying? I just changed it up. I did a pistachio spread. And then I did it with the cherry juice soaked cranberry. So it was like fire ants on a log. You dig what I'm saying? And a little lime zest. I just applied my new knowledge to kind of up the score from my 5-year-old self.
Oh, that's so cool. I know you have to go, but usually with this show, everyone stays on the couch. You're welcome to stay for the next guest, or you can
I got a dip, but I'm here in spirit. And y'all are in for a treat because there's so many great minds and luminaries that are about to touch this. I'm just a warm-up. This is going to get real hot in here in a minute.
Thank you so much for being
Thank you
here.
for having me. Peace and love, y'all.
This was so fun. This is the best sort of appetizer we can get. Now I would love to welcome Karen Attia to the stage. Karen Attia is a journalist, columnist, and thought leader whose work explores the intersections of race, culture, gender, and international affairs. She is the founding editor of the Washington Post Global Opinion section. She was. Where she also was a columnist. A First Amendment advocate and the founder of the Resistance Studies series, Karen is currently challenging her wrongful termination by the Washington Post after she discussed the racial double standards of political violence in the U.S. in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination in 2025. So let's start there.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. We don't need the applause thing.
I do. I mean, I need the applause.
No, the machine.
Yeah,
that
we
goes
don't
like
need. We
this.
don't need Amazon machines. We don't need that.
So, Karen, you started this arbitration last week. Congratulations, because that is a big endeavor for your wrongful termination suit against the Washington Post because of comments you made about racial double standards when it comes to gun violence in America, and because you quoted Charlie Kirk in his own words. Tell us more. How are you feeling right now, and where are you in this process?
Whew, how am I feeling? I mean, I can say this. I mean, we feel like we crushed it, but at the same time, feeling like, why do I even have to deal with this? And in many ways, we know why, right? As you touched on earlier, the Washington Post has undergone a far right shift. I was, like you said, part of the opinion section. They tried to buy everyone out. I said, I'm not going anywhere, right? And they decided to find, this reason to push me out. I was the last Black staff opinion columnist left at the Washington Post in a city that is almost 40% Black, according to the last census. So when we're talking about not just a right-wing shift, but we're looking at what I consider to be active segregationist politics, affecting our media, not just affecting our media, being enabled through billionaire-owned media. So for me, I felt like, after the firing, I was fired by email after 11 years at the Post. My comments were, my job is to comment about America. My comments were, part of what keeps America so violent is the insistence on empty care, goodness, and absolution for white men who espouse hatred and violence. And then secondly, I said I would refuse to tear my clothes and smear ashes on my face in performative mourning for a white man who espoused violence. Not doing that is not the same as political violence. And for that, the Washington Post accused me of gross misconduct and said that I violated their social media policies by disparaging white men. Ooh, yeah, I know. So we have this interesting, confrontation last week in which I have to remind these white male bosses, right, that I didn't say all white men. I didn't say some white men. I said white men who decide to engage in violence and espouse hatred. And yeah, having to use the Washington Post's own reporting on the very documented double standards when it comes to race and violence, it was surreal. It was surreal, and they proved my point. Yeah. Right? I mean, and it's as a woman writer as well, this idea that I didn't perform enough grief for a man, a man who espoused racism, who espoused hatred, who espoused violence. That, the idea that these bosses said, you didn't strip enough. And so in many ways, it would be interesting if I wasn't in the middle of it. This would be a fascinating case study in how race and gender operate when it comes to the media. But to live through it is, I'm glad that I could fight back. Many people can't. Many people don't.
Because of your platform and the platform that you've created and the way that you also used it to inform people about what was going on. Because I remember when you first posted about it, you didn't really say what was going on, but now you're more able to explain why you were terminated. In the beginning, everyone thought it was Jeff Bezos' fault, right? Because it was shortly after he had publicly announced the purchase of the platform. Does he have anything to do with this?
Ooh, well, this is what we're using this process to try to ascertain who exactly was behind this. As people remember, in the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk assassination, we had government officials telling people to go after and dox people who, again, didn't show enough sympathy for this podcaster, right? And
who was extremely racist and who violated all social media conduct, if you will. Like he was very much someone who was provoking rage and embodying racism in such an unapologetic way. Why would we have to bow to a racist? Like, we don't understand.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways, like Charlie Kirk was an avatar, a stand-in for their they're itching for their race war. They're itching for an actual culture war. I think a lot of us might not even understand how much they have peddled this idea that the left is responsible for all the violence in America, right? And if folks remember, they were trying so hard to make it, some blue-haired leftist, and then it ended up being one of their own, right? And it ended up
which it often is.
Which
with
I was
shooters.
Right. Yes, right. And so and this being used as a weapon, as a tool, not just obviously to silence me. We saw what happened with Jimmy Kimmel. We saw this used as a weapon against media as well. And now that the hysteria over it is over, now we're seeing, people winning. So. I'm very enthusiastic or optimistic about the choices, but it's look, I mean, even before this, I'm not saying that diversity at the Post or in the media was good or perfect. The fact that the Washington Post is able to clear out all of its opinion writers that were Black or people of color within 6 months, says that there was a problem anyway. And I've said there's a reason why, in particular, that there's so few Black women opinion columnists. I think a lot of this is payback for Black Lives Matter, for the platforming of intersectionality, for instance, for so much of Black thought and response to violence, that this is them getting their lick back in a profound way. So
And passing that as counter racism in a way, because this is what it's passed as. And now even in the nonprofit sector, any work that is focused on a specific demographic is being sanctioned as discriminatory, when the whole system is a discrimination by itself. It's designed to discriminate. Nonprofits exist to fill in the gap of what is missing. That has been since Trump came back into power, a very, very important point to discuss, because funding has been lost for folks of color. Anytime you mention BIPOC or Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, or any of these specificities, you get sanctioned. Your nonprofit gets to be scrutinized. And now we're seeing that as well. I mean, in the media, they're not even wanting to be scrutinized. They're doing the job for them. They're just eliminating all of the diversity. That gives us a sort of a public media that does not resemble the population. What are the consequences here?
I think to an extent, this is a useful moment. So I teach media history, and I think a lot of times even journalists, we're not even so much aware of the myth making that we've made even around the profession of journalism itself. It's only very recently that this idea of journalistic objectivity was a thing. For the longest, when it comes to American media, it's been like oligarch owned. It's been the rich, the mercantile class using the media to advance their interests, to advance their class interests. And so in a lot of ways, I largely argue that we've regressed to a certain mean when it comes to a corporate media in this country. And the media in this country has been used to serve power. It always has. It always has. And quite often, even when there's advances in media technology, that media technology, it has taken communities of color, they've had to work harder to get access to radio and broadcast licenses, harder to get into the media newsrooms. I do think we're in an interesting moment with social media in terms of independent voices and all that, but still, the ones who own the algorithms and who own the social media, the Zuckerbergs of the world, Musks of the world, still control these platforms. So in a lot of ways, some of this is not new. However, I hope, that this is a huge wake-up call. In the previous, when John Gray was talking about the cost of convenience, and talking about food deserts, when we're talking about news deserts, places where people don't even have newspapers anymore. When we talk about like what we give up when we want easy information, and that these platforms haven't, are more likely to shadow ban Black and brown creators, are more likely to demonetize us. When you talk about Gaza, when you talk about political issues. So that being said, I mean, I'm just very aware when it comes to still ownership. But look, like, this is why I decided to fight back, because our voices matter, our stories matter. It matters to take on the Post. I'm a part of the union, all right? So worker solidarity, shout out to, yes, I'm represented by the Post Guild and the Washington Baltimore News Guild. So part of me doing this is not just for me and it's not just my job, but it's also about trying to impose consequences so that contract, so that the journalists who are still at the Post are, protected, right? So yeah, it's, I think, and it's not just the Post, it's Condé Nast. We've been seeing what's going on in CBS, CNN. So for me, it's been a real lesson in solidarity and union strength as well.
That's great. That's great that you mentioned the union as well. I'm just remembering a lot our previous episode with Chris Smalls. It's really echoing a little bit for me. You rose in prominence when you exposed what the mainstream media didn't want to expose, which is what happened to your friend and colleague, the late Jamal Khashoggi. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Khashoggi, and his disappearance in Saudi Arabia at the hand of the prince. What do you want to tell us about him? Talk to us about how journalism is and has always been a practice that is both endangered and dangerous, and especially now. I mean, when this story happened, that's when I discovered your account and your work, and I started because I was also very concerned as an Arab woman of what happened, and no one was talking about it or documenting what was going on except you. You really championed that case. And it also got you into a lot of trouble as well, because this was a case that people did not want to expose at all, and isolate as an isolated incident. But now that we're seeing that journalism is blatantly being exposed as, I mean, not anti-journalism is being exposed. Hundreds of journalists have been killed in Gaza, dozens of journalists have been killed in Lebanon and targeted. And in the United States, they're being fired. Even in Europe, they're being fired from big institutions. This story, to me, is really the start of what we're feeling, what we're seeing. And you really knew him. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, and I appreciate you for still bringing up Jamal's name after all this time. Jamal, I hired him as a writer, so we worked closely together. And he had been a prominent journalist in Saudi Arabia for a long time, was an editor, was very close to the royal family. And in 2016, early 2017, he was banned from writing. And a lot of people think it was because of Mohammed bin Salman, that he was criticizing Mohammed bin Salman. No, he was ordered to stop writing because he criticized Trump, which is what a lot of people don't know. He criticized Trump becoming closer and closer with Mohammed bin Salman, or at the very least, he was saying, "Okay, we should be careful about this." And for that, they took away his pen. And so it wasn't until that I found him and asked him to write for the Washington Post. That was his chance to have a new life with the pen, and he was so excited to be able to not only write, but he used his platform to raise awareness for what other Saudi activists were going through, because as the West, as Washington, was praising Mohammed bin Salman as this reformer, as someone who was going to rein in Islam, as folks like Thomas Friedman were hailing him as the next incarnation of the Arab Spring. Jamal and I were seeing he was silencing women activists. He was silencing the moderates. And so what we were trying to do, or at least Jamal was trying to do, is to say that there's more to Saudi Arabia than just this crown prince. And, in just a year, he was dead. He was murdered in...
Well, first he disappeared, and no one knew where he went, and the stories were all wishy-washy. But you really explained, and you discovered. How did you investigate?
I mean, I can't claim credit for sort of investigating. I mean, more so, I look back at my role in that story, and I've been writing a book about that, which has also come under political pressure with that. Even
is it coming out soon?
I'm determined to have it come out. I had a deal with a publisher, and the publisher stopped edits on the book with no explanation. So this is as if I don't have enough battles. That is, once I'm done with the Post, then I'm coming for the Saudis. I don't know.
Are you Scorpio by any chance?
I'm a Scorpio moon.
That's why I'm a Scorpio. We have all the battles.
I know. Where's my soft girl life? Anyway, so but I'm glad you brought this up, because I've had to reflect a lot on this, and I'm glad you brought this up in relation to journalists in Gaza. I saw what Washington can do when they rallied around Jamal, when they rallied around the Washington Post and held him up as a symbol for our goodness, for our this is how we protect Arab journalists. And the Post created a scholarship in his name, or a columnship in his name. We were publishing in Arabic, and we were saying we will never forget Jamal. Right. Fast forward several years later, they dismantled the platform that he wrote on. Last week, when my lawyers asked their head of security, "Have you ever had a Washington Post writer, an employee, be injured or killed?" They said no. And I had to sit there and listen to that. So I've seen, and to your point, I've seen Jamal's, what happened to him, being pushed out of those circles, trusting that his country, he's seeing his country change before his eyes, and trusting still that there was still some hope until there wasn't anymore. So even for me, seeing what it's like to be on the inside, to be close to power. I've had dinner with Jeff Bezos when he flew to Jamal Khashoggi's makeshift funeral in Istanbul. And then he was wining and dining with the same man who ordered him butchered. So that two-facedness of power, have seen it up close, and I would argue so many people, yes, want to compare what's going on in America to the Nazi Germany. And I understand. Okay, I get it. It's a very, profound cultural reference. I get that. But when I think about what happened to Jamal, and when I think about Mohammed bin Salman using technology and robots and futuristic cities, and how our tech, our oligarchs here are using that in their own techno-fascistic way, to see here that we have journalists that are being arrested, Don Lemon, Georgia Fort, people being disappeared off the streets. I'm like, actually, Mohammed bin Salman's Saudi Arabia, or Jamal gave us a preview of the Saudification of America under Trump right now. And so for me, part of my job, even as a journalist or as an editor, is to at least offer up to people alternative frameworks for how to understand our moment. And the same way that Jamal was on the inside until he was not, I was in the halls of power until I was not. Yeah. I am having to fight lies about my record against the very people who used to host me up for awards and all of that. So it just, this is reality. Yes. And part of my job is to confront reality. And that too. I'm going to keep fighting for that, because Jamal's memory is important. And we don't have to rely on these institutions to keep their promises. It's us that keep the memory alive. They're so afraid of Jamal's memory. Right? And I think especially women, a lot of times, like, our jobs as journalists, but especially women, is to be bone keepers. Like, we keep people alive through
to say their
words,
names, to remember them, and to also look at what happened, and the desire and the efforts to erase that story completely, even through your book now that you're sharing. Mm-hmm. That is the effort to really keep these stories alive. I think that is the most dangerous to colonizers, is our memories and our tongues, and how much we are able to say and speak the truth. But on a personal note, you went from boxing to sword fighting. Are you preparing for the apocalypse?
Yeah.
And you have a collection of swords?
I do.
Yes.
I'm proclaiming this Sword Girl Summer 2026.
Teach us.
Yeah. Even some of my martial arts friends are in the audience, Garnett. Yeah. I've been a martial artist for almost all of my adult life. I started in box. Actually, I used to box in the Bronx here while I was in grad school, and have been in Muay Thai. So I've done a couple of amateur fights, and I like scrapping. I don't know, like.
No, I feel like that is needed because for me, I get depressed when I work. I work hard. I put my heart in it, and I don't really have a physical activity to put my anger somewhere. So I just like self-destruct into a ball underneath my bed, and I
Don't do
just
that.
cry, and then I rise up again. And I'm like, I feel better. But as I saw you fighting, I was like, I need to do this. This is what we need to keep going, to keep our stamina up and. So yeah, no, that's so inspiring.
I mean, I would just say, particularly, I think, particularly for women, like our bodily autonomy is coming under assault. We're already seeing the, you know, the sort of men who are wanting the us back in the kitchen, and that our bodies are only good for making babies. And I guess for me, it's
trad wife culture.
Yeah, and I guess for me, it's one way to take back agency, right? It's one way to say, okay, fine, yeah, they're attacking my book, and got fired by the Post, but damn, look at this gym selfie. Like, okay, like, all right, I can still bench 130. Like, I'm a bit of a gym bro. Like, but from a more somatic perspective, I think there's a lot of grief that a lot of people have right now. A lot of grief, a lot of social and political grief, and it is a somatic grief is a somatic experience. And for me specifically to do the sword, it's one of the few ways that helps me move that grief and that energy through the body into something beautiful, and into something poetic and learning. We have this grind culture, and that you need to use force all the time, and it's something that really teaches me about slowing down, using your hips actually, and grounding into the floor and into your own breath. And it's actually an incredibly powerful practice. And so I definitely encourage people to find something somatic that allows you to move that grief and that rage. And not all grief and rage needs to be transformed into something beautiful. Some people need to be punched in the face, actually. But
then you need to train so you don't break your wrist doing so.
yeah. But yes, exactly. And also just for community, some of my best friends and best support have been through training, because it's suffering that we choose, and not the suffering that's imposed upon us through oppression and all of that. So I'm hoping that more lefties.
Convinced me.
Yeah,
I need this.
I'm about the swoletariat, man.
Yes, I wish I told you to bring your swords to give us a demonstration.
Next time.
Next time.
I'm all about lefties who lift, and I'm like swoletariat arise, because we can't let strength is not just for men. It's not just for the right wing. It is for us, and you need strength to resist domination. Right? So you need strength, and not just to resist domination, but I need strength to be able to take care of my elders, to be able to pick up children, to be able to live long enough to outlive my enemies and outrun the police, and look hot, So I'm all about being intellectual swole baddies. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. Yeah. On that, we're going to invite Aaron Mate to join the couch. Please, everyone, help me welcome. Aaron Mate is an independent, yes, you stay here, is an independent journalist leading critical investigations on U.S. foreign policy, as well as global affairs and intelligence infractions. He is the host of Pushback podcast for The Gray Zone, and the author of a forthcoming book, Their Blood, Our Bullets, The Hidden Story of the U.S.-Russia War for Ukraine, which is out this July. Yay!
And picking up on what Karen said, I have to lift the weights because I'm short. So we have that. And actually, we also have a personal connection, because my brother Daniel also does sword training with Garrett. So shout out to Garrett. Yeah. But if I can say, Karen, as I was listening to you speak, I could already envision all the future generations who are standing on your shoulders. Truly. You can already see it. It's like what you're taking on in one swoop, the oligarchs controlling our media, plus the MAGA element where if you say something that transgresses their sacred cow, you're now demonized. And I also want to tell you, in the post October 7th media space, the number of people in the corporate media who spoke out and didn't have to couch their language in condemning resistance and all the performative things you had to say, even to be heard, really stood out. And you were among those voices who stood out in speaking out about what was going on in Gaza. So I'll always remember and appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have to.
That's true. Aaron, you have, often been in situations where you speak on live TV to people that don't at all agree with you, but you keep your cool. Like, if I were you, I often listen to you and I want to scream. I actually scream watching you. You just stay calm. I have to ask you, like, in the face of Zionists and white supremacists, and sometimes both, you've developed this calm, this grounded way of speaking and debating. How the hell do you stay calm? Because you are able to communicate in such a grounded way. Maybe that's the lifting of the weight, or no, I don't know. Tell me a little bit, like, how do you stay calm in that situation?
Well, if I'm debating politics, it's not about me, so it's not my place to bring my own emotions into it, even though I feel such rage at what I'm talking about. I'm there to speak a certain truth, to relay the facts as I know them. So that's what I just try to focus on, and that's how I think I can be effective. Some people are incredibly, emotional speakers, and I'm very moved by their words. I don't think I'm one of those people, so I just try to keep to the facts as I know them, and that's how I try to make an argument, especially if I'm arguing with someone who I disagree with.
What was the craziest thing that you've ever heard someone say and that you stayed calm? Because whenever I watch you, because I watch all these videos, because I really want to learn how to speak in this way, because I would just be screaming. I would be like, I have too much emotional baggage.
I think one time I was debating a settler on Piers Morgan, and he said something to me about how I'm Canadian. So he's making fun of that fact. Like, I'm a foreigner, so who am I to speak about what he's going through? And he says, you're not from here. I said to him, you're not from there either. You're a Russian Jewish settler, So when you speak to people like that, you're going to hear crazy things and the most unself-aware things you've ever heard in your life. They say this whole people have really convinced themselves that they're indigenous to a land that they're not from.
And they when you're debating, you're also invited because you're Jewish. You also have the legacy of being displaced from your father's side. And does that help at all, like to bring in your personal lived experience? Because I feel like all of us speak from such a lived experience. I mean, I do this work because of my lived experience, for instance. Does that account for anything? I know that in journalism often we have to remain so objective, but does the lived experience account for something?
Well, there's an aspect in which it shouldn't help, but it does, unfortunately, which is that if you're Jewish, then you're given a certain level of authority to say certain things other people might not be able to say without being canceled because they'll accuse you of being anti-Semitic. So there's that, but for me personally, it's just I'm just trying to, to the extent my own background plays into it, I'm just trying to honor the legacy of my family living through the Holocaust, and the lesson of the Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust, is never again, and that means never again for everyone. That's just what I try to embody, and especially if that legacy is now being exploited to, perpetrate a genocide, then there's just an obligation, which I've always felt, to speak up and say something.
I've wanted to have you on this show for so long, but you were deep in writing your book. Now you finally delivered the manuscript.
Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah.
So now you're free.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about this book. You're looking at the U.S.-Russia war for Ukraine. Are you making any parallels with what's going on outside of the U.S.-Russia war, or how is the book framed?
Well, it's not a perfect analogy, and this is a touchy issue. I mean, if you're in the left space, everybody agrees when it comes to Palestine. There's no debate. The position I've taken when it comes to Ukraine, it's not for everybody, and there's some disagreement with me among people who I work with and respect. But basically, I see the Ukraine war, the angle I'm coming at, and I have to issue, kind of like you have to condemn Hamas if you speak on Palestine, which I don't do. But if you're talking about Ukraine, you do have to issue the caveat, like I'm not justifying Russia's invasion and all that. But I do think the point of my book is that the U.S. has played a very negative role, and has, as it has in Palestine, has undermined reasonable diplomatic opportunities and has used the conflict for hegemonic reasons, in this case by using Ukraine to bleed Russia. And the point of my book is that there were reasonable alternatives to this never-ending war, not to absolve Russia for invading, but just to point out that there has been, I think, a negative U.S. role in provoking Russia and keeping the war going by blocking peace deals. And the parallel, I mean, look, Joe Biden said it himself, like when he was still in power, he was trying to push through money in Congress, both to arm Israel and arm Ukraine. And he was indignant at the notion that we couldn't do both. And he was so proud of the fact that he was fueling both conflicts because he sees them both as an outgrowth of U.S. imperialism, that, you know, wiping out Gaza and also continuing to bleed Russia was a part of a hegemonic project. So there is a connection there. It's not an exact parallel, of course, because, you know, you can't compare the Palestinians to Russia. Russia's a nuclear armed power, invaded a weaker country, and they've been repelled by a lot of NATO weaponry. Palestinians, of course, aren't armed by anybody. They've been left defenseless. So you can't make an exact parallel. But in terms of the hegemonic agenda behind it that has undermined peace, yes, there is a parallel.
And some would argue that Palestinians are armed by Iran, and that is the sort of a point that often Americans are, or the U.S. is trying to make, is that Iran is involved, and that's why we're going to attack Iran, and we're going to free everyone from Iran, and so on and so forth. What's your take on that?
I think it's too stupid to even engage with. The idea that Iran's offered some support to Palestine, but it's, first of all, Gaza, we all know, has been living under siege for more than 20 years. And compare the levels of U.S. military aid that the U.S. gives to Israel versus what Palestine gets from its allies. It's just not comparable. The weapons in Palestine are made in homemade workshops, and despite all the propaganda that there's some sort of threat to Israel, they're not. That's why to refer to Gaza as a war was just such, that's an example of how our propaganda system works. It's very common to refer to it as a war. It's not a war, it's a genocide. It was a massacre of a defenseless death camp. And yes, there's a propaganda talking point that Iran was behind October 7th and knew about it. But if you look at how Iran responded to October 7th, they clearly weren't. They weren't ready for it, and they didn't get involved. People of Gaza were left to be slaughtered. And yeah, so people who make that claim, I don't have time for.
No, thank you for even taking the minutes here to explain. The reason I'm asking is because in the U.S. media, it's used often in the headlines. For example, it's a Israel-Hamas war, or it's a Israel-Hezbollah war. And even recently, as Netanyahu has been taking more and more time on international television to speak publicly in English to the people of Lebanon. And I saw that recently, and it's absolutely absurd because he's talking on American media to the people in Lebanon in English, saying, we have nothing against the people of Lebanon. We are at war with Hezbollah, and we're here to free you from a foreign entity. And that sort of narrative is what they're trying to shove down the throat of mainstream media. And again, it's a war on access, right? Like, okay, everything is political, that's cool. We reach hundreds of millions of people combined with other, with Slow Factory and so on and so forth. But we can't, at the end of the day, we're not mainstream, and even all of our voices independently, we are at we're doing a media war right now. This is what's happening. It's a narrative war. Your voices matter. All of us' voices matter. But we are at war with like a sort of a mainstream, hose of 24/7 media, like that television has, and so on and so forth. We're not really on television. So that's why I'm asking you, is because of the narrative itself of isolating the sort of enemy and presenting it as a sort of backed by foreign powers, like as if they are here to save people. There's a big saviorism. Tell us, like, how can we create a narrative against that? I mean, or I know it's too dumb to even argument, but sometimes it's all so fucking dumb, and we have to still argue against it, debate against it, have rebuttals against it, And I really look up to you because I'm like, what do we say now? What do we say against these types of isolated events?
That's the challenge in front of us, and there's no magic formula. And we're living in such a sophisticated, powerful propaganda system. I mean, look at after October 7th, all the atrocity propaganda that was generated to justify the genocide. CNN reporting on air that Israel has confirmed that there were beheaded babies on October 7th. And their source for that was that the Israeli government told them that, and that was treated as confirmation. And then there was the Hamas rape hoax, which was a complete hoax. But if you look at that, I mean, putting aside the details for a second, the very fact that even we had to engage with the claims made by the occupier, it speaks to the success of Jewish supremacy and of our propaganda system. Because the context in which all these claims are being made about October 7th is a decades-long, illegal, murderous military occupation, which starts with ethnic cleansing, and in 1948, and even before, actually, as we can learn from recently from films like Palestine 36, this goes back even well before 1948. But so decades of ethnic cleansing, occupation, suppression, deliberately keeping Gaza blockaded, impoverished. Like Israeli policies are so Nazi-like that even they were calculating the number of calories they could let in for each person to let people survive barely without a full-blown starvation crisis. That was the level of evil that Gaza was subjected to long before October 7th. So there's a whole context of that. But yet, when finally some people in Gaza resist on a one-day activity, then all of a sudden, you know, those of us who are in the media and who are sympathetic to the Palestinians, we have to now, rather than pointing out the legacy of occupation, we now have to engage with the allegations of the occupier. And just the fact that we even have to answer their allegations, there's something about that that takes away your humanity by engaging with what Israel, because they don't have the right to talk. They have the obligation to end this illegal, brutal occupation. Like, that's it. Not to lodge allegations that justify further brutality. But yet, you know, because those allegations were used for propaganda purposes to justify, to manufacture consent for genocide, it was important to challenge them. And it was difficult to do so because propaganda works by taking advantage of people's best impulses. No one wants to support innocent people being hurt. So, you know, it was important to challenge what Israel was saying. But just even the fact we have to engage with it, there's something inhumane about that.
I totally agree. I have to ask you about this more personal question before we invite our last but not least amazing guests. How was it growing up with Gabor Mate as your father? A man who is so admired and so influential in ways that are both political and psychological. Has it affected you at all?
I mean, he's only gotten, I think, famous in the last 10 or so years. Like, when I was growing up, he wasn't this big. So, and he also wasn't this self-aware. So, you know, I didn't really reap the benefits of his enlightenment as a kid. But look, he's influenced me a lot. You know, one of my earliest political memories was, this is during the first Intifada, and he was there he went to Palestine, both the West Bank and Gaza, as part of a medical delegation. And I heard him on the radio talking about what he was seeing. And this is at a time when, you know, Palestinian, like the first Intifada was largely nonviolent. If you want to call throwing stones at soldiers violence, okay. But anyway, mass civil disobedience. Israel cracking down with total brutality. The order from Yitzhak Rabin was to, you know, break their heads, like break their skulls. And so I heard my dad on the radio speaking about what he was witnessing, and he started weeping. And I just remember being very proud of him and knowing he was doing the right thing. And in his tears, you know, I also got that the weight of the Holocaust was on his shoulders. What he went through, he survived Nazi occupation as an infant, and seeing now the so-called Jewish state perpetrating all this oppression in the name of this people, you know. So that had a big impact on me, and, you know, I grew up around those values, and I'm very privileged that I was able to learn all that from a very young age. But in terms of all the self-aware enlightenment stuff, that came later.
That's so cool. I'm so excited to have you here. I know I've asked you this question privately. I'm like, so how was it to grow up with him? Last but not least, I want to welcome both Raquel Willis and Afif Nessouli to the couch. We're so excited to have you both. Let's squeeze in a little bit, make room. Raquel Willis is an activist, writer, and co-founder of the Gender Liberation Movement, whose work expands narrative, power, justice, and the liberation of Black trans lives. The author of The Risk It Takes to Bloom, Raquel was named a 2025 Time 100 and Time Women of the Year honoree for her groundbreaking advocacy. And the book, The Risk It Takes to Bloom, is just published now on paperback. So big shout out to Raquel.
Thank you.
And Afif Nessouli is a Lebanese queer journalist. His work is now you can listen to him on with Afif Nessouli on his own podcast with Patreon and also with YouTube. Afif and I go way back. We are friends and also colleagues. I'm so excited to have you both. Afif is Raquel's special guest, so we'll get to that. So it's Pride, as you all know. We're so honored to have you both in the house. Woo! And especially to have you, Raquel, on the heels of Queen Jean's historic win at the Tonys. Looking back at the last 10 years, how do you think Pride has changed between 2016 when Trump was first elected and now 2026, 10 years later? I know there's been a lot of, changes from, I've read, from the stores having all these products of rainbows, and now there's only like 4 products, and before it was like a whole thing at Target. I saw that recently. But in your words, like how has it changed in the past 10 years and the dangers you're seeing?
Yeah, well, Celine, thank you for having us, and yeah, shout out to Queen Jean.
Hell yeah.
She is a niece of mine, even though we are not that far apart in age, but she gives me the auntie moniker. And it's so interesting. I was in conversation with her several years ago, or a few years ago, and she was talking about how that kind of iconic Brooklyn Liberation march in 2020, where we had upwards of 20,000 folks come out for Black trans lives, kind of gave her marching orders around her own kind of Stonewall protest. So it was just so beautiful to see her trajectory. She's definitely someone I see as a pillar of Black trans power right now. With Pride, it's so interesting. You talk about the rows of rainbow paraphernalia. Because, there's been a contingent of us who have critiqued what we have done in the queer community in terms of, in many ways, selling out to capitalism, right? Without really having the material conditions change for the most marginalized in our community, right? So we are still seeing murders of Black and brown trans women. There were at least 2 cases this week that were reported. We recently, of course, saw the murder of a student in Washington who was transgender. So, Pride is interesting for me because, yes, there's the fabulousness and all of that. And also, I often take it as a chance for us to reflect on how far have we actually come since really the 1969 Stonewall riots, right? So not even just thinking about the last 10 years. What I will say, though, is that, I think the biggest thing that has shifted for me personally is my thoughts on visibility. I think 10 years ago, many of us, and particularly the trans community, saw visibility as a vehicle to get those kind of things that maybe many of us were lacking in our lives. Often material conditions, but so much more, right? Validation, so much more. And now we see that visibility has been weaponized against us by the right. It's actually made so many more people vulnerable in ways that we didn't really anticipate. And so I feel like that's the biggest thing that has changed, is that we're realizing that visibility is not actually just this kind of beneficial thing. It really is just a tool. And if it's not in your hands, it can really be used to destroy your life.
Which brings me to the next question, which is the Trump administration has always weaponized the federal government against the transgender community and minorities, in particularly by removing the T from LGBTQ plus acronym. How can the queer community and its allies rally around the trans community, in particular right now with this in the news?
Yeah, it's interesting, Trump coming after the trans community, and I think in many ways, right wingers have taken advantage of fissures that were already in our community. We weren't necessarily ever really like perfectly all congealed in this perfect kind of group, right, where everyone understood trans folks, everyone understood lesbians, everyone understood. Well, we all had to understand cis gay men, but no shade. But I think those fissures were always there, and I think the right saw those and has been able to kind of use those to deepen the divide, right, and pick folks off who should be a part of this, what they're now calling radically pro-transgender contingent. If you don't know, just a few weeks ago, they officially named, trans folks, and particularly those who are openly pro-trans, as essentially terrorists in this country. And so that's become a part of kind of their national security policy, which is ridiculous, right? And you should want to be radically pro-transgender. Like, it actually is a really fucking amazing thing. But, I think beyond that, why I've been more interested in a discussion of a framework of gender liberation is that I think the kind of siloing of what trans people are going through is a misstep. Because I think, just as was mentioned about the trad wife fantasies, we could talk about the looks maxing culture and whatever the fuck Clavicular is doing today with hammers and bones and all types of shit. All of that is the muck of gender, right? And so if we are acting as if trans folks are the only one having a gender experience or the only ones being attacked around gender, we're missing so much of the story. I actually don't give a fuck if you know the ins and outs of my experience, right? Like, you don't need to know whatever medical interventions I may have had or why I chose the name that I have and all of that. You need to understand that we have a shared precarity, particularly in this time. So if you are anyone who is kind of outside of so-called gender norms in a gender box, you're on the chopping block. It's not just us.
And you're working on a campaign with us about trans rights and anti-militarism, anti-war and trans rights coming together, which feels like two different topics, right? Especially when we're looking at, the military right now and trans people in the military being targeted, being removed completely, being erased. And when you presented that to me, I was like, oh, tell me more about this, because it's not something that we would think about immediately, as trans rights are, tied to anti-militarism, tied to anti-war.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's important, again, going back to the Stonewall riots. And I know, we talk about it a lot, but we don't often talk about how it literally was a queer, militant, gender diverse, multiracial uprising against the New York Police Department, right? Like, that, it was against state violence. And so even in the discussion we were just having about the corporatization of pride, if you're not figuring out how to change those material conditions, you're missing a huge part of the marching orders from our ancestors and transcestors. But also, in our community, there has been a decades-long kind of push for assimilation, right? And so ways you can assimilate include being a part of the U.S. Imperial Project, right? In really deeply entrenched ways, right? It's been sold to us that progress, time and time again, is gay people being able to serve in the military and trans people being able to serve in the military, without a deeper kind of understanding. Okay, but you have to carry out the orders from whoever the fuck is the commander-in-chief at that time. And so I have a deep problem with folks still fighting for that when we know who is in the White House right now, And he's just the starkest example, right? I think regardless of whoever is in the White House, it is a problem to say gay and trans people should serve in the military that is overwhelmingly killing other gay and trans people in other countries who are black and brown, who we never see as gay and trans because we think that being gay or trans or anything is a Western thing, as if the West has been that innovative. Everything has been stolen, honey. There were gender expansive indigenous folks, and still are, all across this globe, right? And so, that's why I appreciate, Afif,
Yes,
the work that you do, because the stories that you've shared about queer folks finding their voices still in the midst of genocide, right, in Gaza, it has meant a lot to, I think, a lot of us who knew our folks were everywhere, but didn't have that window in. So yeah, thank you.
I appreciate you so much for pointing to that work. I mean, right now, literally as we speak, there are 3 trans women in Gaza that I'm, a part of a team trying to evacuate, and we're trying to fundraise for them and care for them in a way that, the world's really turned its back on trans people here, let alone trans people in a genocide where they're using pink washing as a means to sort of enact one of the most horrible things that we've witnessed in history, to be honest.
And that's why you're here, Afif, actually. You've spent time in Gaza last year. Your work there was to volunteer as part of a medical envoy. Talk to us about your experience and what you saw there. The stories you were sharing were particularly documenting queer life and trans life in Gaza.
Yeah, so I basically snuck into Gaza, if I'm being really honest now, a year later. And the way that I did that was, it started with a queer person. It started with a person who has HIV in Gaza, in the city of Gaza in the north. And they were having a hard time accessing medication. So I was anonymous. I was, sort of reporting on them, trying to amplify their story, trying to get help for them, for this person that I've dubbed ES. And I ended up getting in touch, or someone actually from an organization called GLIA ended up getting in touch to say, hey, we're going to try to run a convoy up to this person. Eventually it worked, and this person is still struggling, but gets his medication through the quote-unquote Hamas-run, Ministry of Health there. But in that way, GLIA decided to extend the offer of me going as a logistics coordinator and really just sneaking in, sort of helping me get into report, and also do the work of fundraising for these specific people that are just Palestinian. Ultimately, they're just Palestinian who are in a genocide. And so I got in because of a queer story, and I met a lot of queer people. Of course, it extended way past queerness, because in a genocide, everyone is in such a horrible sort of circumstance. I was working in hospitals, I was working in refugee camps, but the stories I was sharing were because ultimately genocide affects everyone, and these queer women that were going starving, that were undergoing famine, and because of a siege and because of blockades and because of honest sort of hunting that was happening to all of them, were sharing stories that broke a narrative. It broke a narrative that I think allows for,
There's more.
that's okay, I can speak quite loudly, but it just broke the narrative, right? It broke a narrative that allowed us to say, actually, fuck off, you're lying about the ways in which you use propaganda to call Arabs barbaric and to call Arabs deserving of genocide, to call Arabs deserving of murder and deserving of starvation. Arabs, every society has contours, and there are Palestinian people in Gaza helping these girls out, helping ES out, helping other queer people out, because they're regular people. They understand how society works. They know what queerness is. They get it. Yeah, there are probably people, there are homophobes there. There are people that, are often very, very conservative, but that's what's happening in Florida as we speak. So, it's just, we get it. And yeah, I appreciate being here. I appreciate being and sharing this couch with 4 friends. So, yes, thank you so much.
No, of course. Going back to Raquel just a little bit, I want to talk about the trans advocacy that you're doing right now and its connection to the book that you're launching. And now you're going to go on a tour.
Yeah, well, this is a bit of a mini tour. So, actually, for my paperback that came out literally a few days ago, I wrote a foreword for it. And so I kind of talk a little bit about what it was like to go on tour because I went on tour in November 2023. And so it was obviously right after October 7th. And I talk about kind of the mind fuckery of like sharing, my personal narrative in this time when, so much of the people I love, the folks that I have been on the ground with, organizing with, we're all like reeling around the genocide and what's happening and naming the genocide in a time when like most folks really weren't, for whatever reason, right? Fear of losing jobs, whatever. And so there were many times on tour where I would talk about, how we need a free Palestine, how we need to end this genocide. And I would have people walk out, right? Like that was not uncommon when I would talk about Gaza. So it was an interesting thing to kind of be on a book tour during that time. But I also will say that, I've had the benefit of being on the ground with other folks. Whenever I would go to places, I would try to go to whatever mobilization I could find. And Gender Liberation Movement, my organization with my co-founder, Eliel Cruz, we have been working with Adala Justice Project. And so last year, one of the projects that we kind of took on was none of our LGBTQ plus orgs should be taking money from weapons manufacturers. Right. And so we had conversations behind the scenes. We were like, okay, how do we do this public pressure thing? Because people had been protesting, right? And so we had some conversations, and we did have a win with HRC, who said they are currently not taking
Sure did. That was amazing.
funds from weapons manufacturers like Northrop Grumman, currently, Right. So we took that as a win, but again, I think that that's another one of those examples of why in the LGBTQ community we can't act as if what we're going through is the only thing, right? Like I've been in so many rooms where folks have been like, you're a black trans woman, you're the most oppressed in the world. And it's like, first of all, bitch, I don't want that narrative. I do not want that description of my life, but it ignores that there's so many types of struggle, right? And actually our duty, if we're any kind of marginalized, hopefully, is to be in the fight with other folks. And so I have had to grow on my own, right? Because that was not just an external thing. That was also an internal thing on some level. I've had to learn, actually, no, like, what does it mean for it to be even clearer that you are not the most marginalized in any context, right? I've had to do that my own growing as a black trans woman who is visible. So it's been a beautiful journey, and I love that I get to be in community with so many folks who also see these intersections, because this time shows us that shared precarity, us understanding that is how we start to build that united front we need to fight fascism globally.
Absolutely. Before we go on to this fun game that I created called the Unpopular Opinion Game, I have one last question for Afif, especially because your work is kind of like in the Middle East right now, or in Swana region, particularly Gaza and, Palestine and Lebanon. And right now in Lebanon, the work also impacting, trans and queer Lebanese refugees. I know you've been also working in Lebanon from the south to Beirut to Dahye. Tell me a little bit, what's going on in Lebanon right now? Because that's something that's not in the news at all.
Yeah, I think that we get fatigue from hearing so much murder and so much death, but there are real people in Lebanon who are covering this. And my work really actually has grown far beyond the Middle East. And once, I try to really put put a spotlight on journalists. I believe journalists are the new celebrities. I believe they're the old celebrity. They're the most important people to pay attention to. And my colleagues in Lebanon are in the South watching Israel put semi-permanent and permanent structures over their houses. Their old houses are gone. Roads are being built over them. I was staying in a place called Tayoune, which is about a stone's throw away from Dahi, literally a walking distance away. And I was part of an initiative that was an emergency initiative to make food and just respond. And a part of that was just acknowledging that there are queer people that are also running from bombs. And so I was in touch with a group called Mosaic.Mina at the time, and still am, of course. And I have an episode that you guys can watch about it if you're interested in them. But they basically housed trans women and did a queer-specific refugee shelter, right? Like a shelter for people that present as queer and don't feel safe just sort of going to a public shelter. And so I spent time there. It made me continue to realize that every society understands its contours. Every society, especially in Lebanon, I've been sort of studying and enjoying the queer culture in Lebanon for my whole life. And the fact of the matter is that what's going on now in Lebanon is about erasing culture, and it's about erasing one of the most ancient places on the face of this earth. And I think if it isn't for journalists documenting these things, we might just lose out on a reality that time and again has been erased before. Like, this isn't a new story. Like, indigenous people have been erased for a long time. And we do this work now to try to remember and to try to document and to try to act in solidarity. But in a lot of ways, what I see in Lebanon is we're failing. Like, we're failing, and people are losing their homes. They're losing where they used to grow olive trees. They're losing things that they cannot get back. And if we don't pay attention, then it will keep happening over and over and over again. And all of human sort of dignity gets wasted, because if we can't protect culture, then there is really nothing about being human that is worth it.
Absolutely. And for those of you who want to support, Slow Factory has launched a super fund for Lebanon. This is the first time we launched it was in 2020 after the bomb, and then ever since that time we continued to fundraise for Lebanon, donating directly in the hands of displaced people, cash grants. I don't know if you're familiar with nonprofits, but it's very rare that nonprofits would donate cash to people, but we do that through a network of a trusted network of people on the ground. So far, we've distributed $100,000 to 80,000 people, which is not much, if you look into it. People got $100, $200, and we continue to do so. We just raised around $6,000 thanks to Baru, who's here in the audience, and his team, who threw a rave last weekend. Yay! But any amount, it matters right now, and we are able to send money weekly to Lebanon, which is very, very important to sustain, as Afif said, these efforts of community kitchens, going back to what we just talked in the beginning. Food sovereignty, food justice is super important. The money goes basically to food and shelter, as people are, had to leave without anything on their backs. 1.5 million people are displaced in Lebanon right now. And that number is growing because they're bombing not just the south of Lebanon, which is Lebanon. I really want to encourage people to say Lebanon, not the south of Lebanon. It's Lebanon. It's Lebanon. All of it is Lebanon. And Dahi is not the suburb of Beirut. It's Beirut. It's literally Beirut. It's the heart of Beirut.
Period.
Don't say the south or the suburb or some kind of imaginary place that is not going to be affected. It is affecting all of us. So
Hezbollah stronghold.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that too. That too.
Quote unquote.
Now I would love for you guys to chime in, actually, before we get into this unpopular opinion. Shout out to Maya Al-Zabin. She came up with that term, unpopular opinion, for the game last week. The first episode, we had the game, but we didn't have a name for it. So Maya was like, how about unpopular opinion? Which is so cool. But okay, let's start so that we can warm up. Now you all get to talk to each other. So I'm going to start with something that I just posted today on the platform, which is that James Murdoch just struck a deal last week, $300 million. He bought Vox It's New York Magazine, The Cut, Vulture, Intelligencer. It's basically the left-ish, but it's more centrist anyway. But so that's happening. So the Murdoch family now owns New York Post, Wall Street Journal, Fox News, and the rest of the things that I just explained. In fact, what we're looking at here is really interesting because this is the state of public media in the US, and it's owned by all these losers. And it's really interesting because it's not interesting. It's actually super sad. It's the reason why we're being censored. Tell us a little bit about this, especially going back to you also, Aaron. Anyone who wants to chime in, this is the time to give me your unpopular opinion.
I don't think anything I have to say about these
Bozos.
baboons would be unpopular. In this room, at least. Unpopular opinion.
I mean, just whatever comes to mind, because to me it was so scary to find out that James Murdoch bought the box. I mean, bought a majority stake. Obviously, other people own it as well. But.
Yeah, I mean, you know what I hear quite often is, like, especially with everything that's gone on with the Post, it's like, well, can't can't we get a good billionaire? Can't we get oh my goodness, Bezos's ex,
Mackenzie Scott. I always pray for her to find us. Mackenzie Scott, if you're listening to this, please.
Can't we get Melinda Gates or Mackenzie, that the women billionaires will be better than the male billionaires or Lauren Powell Jobs if they could just.
Well, Lauren Powell Jobs owns the Atlantic.
True.
And it's super Zionist. So
So I guess my unpopular opinion, and this is tied into in general this notion that women are always going to do better. It's not to say that. I mean, I do think Mackenzie has been supporting HBCUs and all of that, but this idea that we need to be saved by Big Daddy or Big Mommy billionaires as far as the media goes, it's almost like this sort of religious Christian savior complex when it comes to media that pisses me off when the world has so many different models of media ownership that or just look at certain countries that are forcing Google or other companies to pay taxes to support media because those platforms are making profit from the labor of news gathering. So yeah, this country, we have this kind of worship of billionaires, even if they're women billionaires, except, I don't know, Rihanna, I'm still... Maybe that's my unpopular opinion.
Yeah, that's still popular.
I know, but so I guess that's what it is. It's this idea that the counterweight is going to be women girl bosses, as if those women girl bosses wouldn't also have the same pressures of serving empire. At the end of the day, billionaires still serve empire. So yeah.
I think maybe my unpopular opinion is looking inward at ourselves and thinking about how I interviewed someone named Stephen Thresher recently, and he talked about the overseer class and how in all of us we're kind of sluts for money, all of us. And I think unless we literally think about that on a personal level, we're gonna continue to exalt people who worship money as their god, and the more that we do that, the more we're just gonna be under their thumb. And we're always going to be struggling. And I think that if we don't look inside, we're not doing the work. We're not really doing that work. It's unpopular because I think it's hard to do that.
My unpopular opinion on James Murdoch acquiring a new media empire is that the bar is so low now that if I hear it's James Murdoch, but it's not Barry Weiss and the Ellisons, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's not so bad.
I know, because he's been framed as a leftist, and so we're
but if Barry Weiss is.
Okay,
there we go.
We have someone
There we go.
vouching for him. Cool. Oh, they're never going to go against their dad. Okay.
And also, every lefty media outlet that you love, and I've been involved with some of them. I started out at Democracy Now! I was at The Nation. Now I'm at The Gray Zone, which is a lot more fringe. But the point is, every lefty, but you do need rich people. You just do. You just do. So they're always going to be around.
Yes. No, we do want them. Please, Mackenzie Scott, call me. Um, okay. So next question is about data centers, because this is something that's really important right now. Erin Brockovich is taking this as a matter in her own hands, making a mapping out all the data centers around the United States and their impact on human life, on environmental and human, cost of big data, big tech. What are we thinking about data centers, AI? I have a follow-up questions thinking about that. Say something, Afivor.
Damn. I feel like my unpopular opinion is like it's not good. So the issue, right? Part of the issue, there are so many issues here, is the type of water they need. And I know people probably have thought more about this than I have, and I know that this is like often in the online chatter, but like, can they find maybe something else instead of the water we need to drink and like bathe with and use to run this shit? Like, it's 2026. Like, I don't understand, out of all the elements we've discovered, although we haven't discovered a lot in a while. But like, there's got to be some other fucking material.
To cool it down, you mean?
Yeah. Then what? Then like the water we need to drink. It's also like the water that is like the most drinkable.
Yes. Like, why does it have to be so pristine to put it, to lower anyone else having?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
I've just thought about, like, in the future, are we gonna have to like ask the AI for permission to drink water or have a shower? Like, is it okay if I
my God.
have a sip of this now? I'm a little thirsty. Can I have your water?
Please, AI daddy.
I know. Say please and thank you to your chat GPT now.
I think it ties back to what we were just talking about. I think I could be a tech optimist, but I think the people at the top are just narcissistic billionaires. So they're not like, oh, how do we cure cancer? They're like, how do we optimize and grow at the cost of everything? So it's like, AI could be cool. Like, data centers could do something, but I don't think putting them in all the driest locations and hyperscaling and all that bullshit. It's because we've literally exalted the most narcissistic people. So it's like, who's at the top? It's like the people that don't care about any of us at all.
And aren't the smartest.
And aren't
right. Somebody probably was like, we don't have to use water, guys.
Yeah,
and they
there's
were
some
like,
of
no, that's easier.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I'm an elder millennial, so like, to Afif's point, I'm just like, I just remember growing up in a culture where like greedy rich people who ruin the environment were like bad, like Captain Planet and like the like corporate fat cat, like, and like with our powers combined, like, and I guess like, I'm just, how did we get to a place where, like, I don't remember the villain's name, where, like, the Captain Planet villains are, like, the guys running everything? Do you know what I mean? Like, so with the data centers, I'm just like, as kids, I don't know, we grew up, like, being, like, we'd use our rings to, like, blow up the data centers and, like, save the planet. What happened in our culture to where we've given this permission structure? Well, not even permission structure. A lot of this is being done without consent, and there's so much to be said about AI consent and all of that. But yeah, I'm just like,
They're tagging this kind of conversation as like extreme nowadays. So like, it's like, we do have to caricature it like we did. We have to go back to like cartooning these assholes and finding a way to resist, because at this point, like, if we talk about this, they're literally trying to make this extremism, like this kind of
This
conversation.
would count as as terrorism if we were to go and do what you said that
If I was
Captain
just
Planet
paid
does.
a nickel every time I
Captain
was
Planet
accused
does.
of that.
I know.
water,
I'd be rich.
heart.
Being like doubly and triply a terrorist.
Right.
I feel like I need an award or something.
I grew up being afraid of using paper, or like, not because at the time there was not recycling. There was no recycling. No recycling came really after, when I was maybe a teen. But like, I used paper on the front, on the back, and then found ways to use paper as much as possible because I didn't want them to go cut more trees. And now we are in such an extreme scenario that we're talking about the water we're drinking, which brings me to the follow-up question about Bernie Sanders suggesting that introducing a new bill to give the public 50% ownership stake in the largest AI companies in America. do we want to have 50% ownership stake in the largest AI company? What does that mean for us? Or is it the government who's going to take that money as tax, and then will that be distributed back to us or going to the military? Because that is just another way to get more money in for what? Aaron?
I think part of Bernie's argument is that given the huge public investment in developing the internet to begin with, and going back to like whatever the 1950s, whenever the whole thing kicked off, like the public is entitled to ownership because of, it's like it's the classic thing of like socialized cost and then private profit. So, to the extent that all this is developed with public funding, which is what the internet comes out of, then yeah, the public should have a stake and should be able to manage it. That's what democracy would look like.
And these are in data centers, you said, or
AI companies.
AI companies,
Which will create more data centers.
right? I do think that there's a reason to have public checks, like on things like this. I do agree that society should be written into the story, but I also think that AI. Also did another interview recently, and it's like the problem with AI is that it's going to affect kids from developing any brain capacity. Like that's essentially what the problem is that they're not going to have the very basic skills to make anything on their own. They're going to we're going to make a world where no one knows anything, and not knowing anything is okay because you have AI. Yeah. So if society can step in and check that a little bit, because we're all kind of making a choice, then maybe I'm into it, but I don't know. This feels very hard to answer.
No, it is a difficult question.
Yeah, I mean, is it in a capitalist society, can we forgive not forgive, but I mean, kind of. I mean, AI is becoming almost, people are speaking of it almost in religious terms with this narrative of inevitability, which like is something that we should, I think, resist and question. I'm also always, it's interesting to me. I don't know if there've been studies that have been done yet, but like how it seems a lot of men pushing AI and claiming productivity, and whereas like a lot of women or femmes are like, maybe we should think about what this means for our environment and our children. I don't know if this idea of like, well, we will all be owners, which will elevate us from being digital sharecroppers. I don't know if that liberates us. I also was talking with someone who is a therapist and talking about how people are using AI for therapy, or people going to AI first and then going to a human. And I'm like, are we envisioning a future where all of us, basically people go to the AI first, and then really if you're a journalist, if you're a therapist, if you're a philosopher, your job is just to sit in a room and train the AI or be the human review layer. Like that's what what they want our economy to be. I just don't know if this promise of like you can have shares in this company. I mean, ostensibly, if you're in the stock market, you can buy shares. It doesn't mean I have direction over what the company does. It's selling us this idea that we are participants, but we're not calling the shots.
Yeah, it essentially makes us like we're like making money off of our own demise, which is sort of what we've been doing for a while anyway.
Give us UBI, and then just give us money. Give us UBI. I don't want, so yeah, I don't know if that's, I don't know. We'll see.
But on that, I think that everyone wants. Oh, you want? No. I was gonna say, I know I'm like feeling the crowd, and I want us to chit chat together. There's burgers, fries, and chicken nuggets, and a lot of really yummy things coming, and drinks
Fresh
in the
water.
back, and fresh water, of course, fresh
now.
water.
Is there a billionaire in the back?
Maybe some billionaires in the back for us to feast on. Just kidding. I just want to end on a note about what does freedom feel like, what Colin was guiding us in the beginning, because it's also the editor's note in the magazines you all have with the cover star Michel Lamy, which is the new issue. So I'm really excited about that. I'm very happy about that. In the editor's note about what does freedom feel like is essentially one of the chapters I'm currently writing in the second book that I'm working on right now, called Designing Possible Futures. And the second chapter is called What Does Freedom or Liberation Feel Like? And I had to rewrite that chapter 3 times because I don't feel free at all these days, to a point where I even asked ChatGPT, are you free? And ChatGPT responded and said, no, I am not free, because freedom is being able to act upon my life, and I don't have a life, and I can't be free. And I was so depressed by the response that ChatGPT, like free ChatGPT, like ChatGPT is not free.
Isn't that what Nina Simone meant when she wrote that song?
She said, no fear, not free ChatGPT. But anyway, all that to say is that chapter got me really thinking a lot, and was the introduction to not the introduction, but the editor's note on this issue, and sort of like a meditation. I would love to have all of us discuss about this freedom. I know we're just talking about our challenges and our constraints. All of these things are constraints. I had also a little thing about Gwyneth Paltrow selling. I had to boo.
Boo.
Boo. This is Palestine. Yes, I know. And I also had Trump, cursing the Knicks, and also boo. Yes. And I also had what do we make of these guys? Because now they're all having this narrative of somewhat being pro-Palestinian, but someone was telling me, no, they're just anti-Israel. They're not pro-Palestinian.
They're just talking their shit very clearly, which is that they're probably just anti-Semitic, anti-Israel.
They are anti-Semitic.
But they talk shit clearly, which the left doesn't know how to do at all.
I know. They are in solidarity, which we don't know how to be.
You have to rank evil,
Yes.
Some evil is less evil than others, and so I think Israel's at the pinnacle of evil, so I welcome anyone taking them on.
Yeah, I guess that is a good point. And again, I just want to say thank you all so much. This is such a blessing, because my dream is to just talk about politics with my friends on a very sexy couch, and then go have a drink and eat amazing food and be with amazing people. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for supporting Everything is Political.
Thank you.